The billionaire servant. Alexander Dane had everything: wealth, power, and influence. He was a self-made multi-billionaire, respected and feared in business circles. But when it came to love, he had learned one painful lesson: money attracted the wrong kind of women. He had watched men like himself marry beautiful women, only to realize too late that their love was for wealth, not for the man behind it. He refused to make that mistake. So, when he met Celia Hartman, a woman of breathtaking beauty and elegance, he was almost certain he had found it. Her beauty was a plus 100% for him. But how would he be sure not to make his most feared mistake? He had to find a way, or perhaps, what better way than to strip himself of his fortune, his status, and his name? He would become Alex Reed, a lowly servant in her household. And he would watch her, study her, and see if beneath her breathtaking beauty lay a woman worth loving, or if she was just another pretty face hiding an ugly soul. On that day, Alex arrived at Celia's estate, dressed in simple clothes, a bag slung over his shoulder. The mansion was a display of excess: tall glass windows, polished marble floors, and chandeliers that dripped with wealth. The moment he stepped inside, he was met with a cold, disapproving stare. Celia Hartman. She was even more stunning up close. Sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, and lips that held a permanent sneer. But beauty meant nothing if the heart beneath it was rotten. She barely looked at him before turning to her housekeeper. "He's the new servant?" "Yes, ma'am," the woman said hesitantly. Celia's eyes raked over him with pure disdain. "He looks slow. I hate slow people." Alex said nothing. She may be having a bad day, he thought. He wasn't even expecting the boss of the house to be friendly with a new servant. "Get to work," she snapped. "I don't pay people to stand around looking stupid." She didn't know it, but she had just passed her first test. Alex quickly learned that Celia wasn't just cruel, she enjoyed it. She treated the staff like objects, as if they existed only to serve her whims. If the maids didn't arrange her clothes perfectly, she threw them on the floor and demanded they start over. If a meal wasn't hot enough, she dumped the plate in the trash and made them cook it again. And if a servant so much as hesitated when she spoke, she fired them on the spot. Alex kept his head down, enduring it all. He worked in silence, sweeping floors, carrying groceries, fixing things around the mansion. Celia never spared him a glance. He was invisible to her. Like all the others, she only spoke to him to bark orders. "Polish my shoes. Open the door. Move out of my way." She didn't ask. She commanded. And yet, Alex saw something none of the other servants did. He saw how empty her life was. Despite the money, the designer clothes, the grand parties, there was nothing behind her cold eyes. She had built a world of luxury, but filled it with nothing but cruelty. And she had no idea what she was about to lose. One evening, Celia hosted a high-profile event. Politicians, business moguls, and celebrities filled the mansion, sipping expensive wine and exchanging empty pleasantries. Alex, dressed in a simple waiter's uniform, moved through the crowd, serving drinks. Celia was in her element, dressed in a dazzling red gown, her laughter fake but convincing. And then it happened. A young maid, nervous and overwhelmed, accidentally spilled champagne on Celia's dress. The entire room went silent. Celia's face darkened. Without hesitation, she raised her hand and slapped the girl across the face. The sound echoed through the hall. The maid trembled, eyes filling with tears. "I am so sorry, ma'am." "Get out," Celia snapped. The girl hesitated. Celia grabbed a glass of wine from a passing waiter and threw it in her face. "I said get out." Humiliation and shame filled the girl's eyes as she turned and ran. The guests murmured, some uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge Celia's cruelty. Alex stood there, gripping the tray in his hands. He had seen enough. This wasn't just a spoiled woman. This was someone completely devoid of kindness. She had failed the test. The next morning, Alex did his chores as usual, acting as if nothing had changed. Celia barely noticed him, as always, but inside, something in him had changed. His attraction to her beauty had died. The illusion had shattered. But instead of leaving, he stayed, because there were more things he needed to see. He needed to see how she would react when she learned the truth. When she realized the nobody she had spent weeks abusing was a man who could have given her everything. And when that day came, he would watch her break. Celia Hartman remained as cruel and heartless as ever. Her world revolved around power, control, and making sure everyone around her knew their place. And in her mind, Alex was nothing. A nameless servant. A shadow meant to obey and disappear. But while Celia never cared to notice, someone else did. A kind heart in a cruel world. Her name was Elena. She was one of the maids, young, soft-spoken, and effortlessly beautiful in a way that wasn't manufactured like Celia's. Where Celia's beauty was cold and intimidating, Elena's was warm and inviting. She had no jewels, no designer gowns, no expensive perfumes, but she had something far rarer, a kind heart. And that was what first caught Alex's attention. It started with little things. One night, after an exhausting day, Alex was finishing up in the kitchen when Elena walked in. "You haven't eaten all day," she said, setting a plate down in front of him. Alex looked up, surprised. Servants were too afraid to form friendships here. Celia's wrath made sure of that. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Elena smiled. "You work harder than anyone. It's the least I can do." He studied her for a moment before picking up the fork. One bite, and warmth spread through him. Not just from the food, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine care. And so the contrast became clearer. While Celia threw tantrums over trivial matters, Elena moved quietly, treating even the lowest servant with kindness. Alex observed the stark difference between them. One woman lived for power, belittling those beneath her. The other had nothing, but still found ways to give. And slowly, Alex felt something shift within him. His heart, once drawn to Celia's beauty, was beginning to recognize the difference between appearance and worth. If Celia noticed anything, she didn't show it. She continued her reign of terror. But she had no idea. She was losing her chance. And she didn't even know it. Celia remained blind to everything, too consumed by her own arrogance to notice what was happening right under her nose. Alex wasn't just testing her anymore. He was slowly, inevitably being pulled toward someone else. Someone who was everything Celia wasn't. But when the truth finally came out, when Celia learned who Alex truly was, the devastation would be irreversible. And that moment was drawing closer. Celia Hartman had never been denied anything in her life. She ruled her world with sharp words and cold stares, bending people to her will. But what she didn't realize was that something was shifting. Someone she had dismissed without a second thought, someone she considered beneath her, was slipping further from her grasp, and someone else was taking her place. Alex found himself drawn to Elena more than he wanted to admit. She was the only light in this dark, oppressive mansion. Whenever Celia wasn't around, they would talk. Not as master and servant, not as people from different worlds, but as two souls who understood each other. One evening, as they cleaned the dining hall, Elena hesitated before speaking. "You don't belong here, Alex." He froze. There it was again, that quiet suspicion in her voice. "What makes you say that?" he asked carefully. Elena smiled, shaking her head. "Call it instinct." Her gaze was soft but knowing. She wasn't pressing him for answers, but she knew. Alex swallowed. No one had ever seen through him like this before, and he wasn't sure if that terrified him, or made him fall for her even more. Celia, of course, noticed none of this. She was too busy drowning in her own arrogance. Her mistreatment of the servants continued, especially toward Elena. She seemed to take pleasure in making her life miserable. One night, Celia ordered Elena to personally serve her dinner, only to slap the tray out of her hands the moment she arrived. "Are you completely useless?" she sneered as food scattered across the marble floor. Elena's hands trembled, but she bowed her head, silently picking up the mess. Alex clenched his fists, rage burning inside him. "One day, Celia, you'll regret this," he said to himself. But Celia wasn't completely oblivious. One evening, as she walked through the halls of her estate, she happened to glance out of the window, and she froze. Down in the garden, near the fountain, she saw something that made her blood boil. Alex and Elena, talking, laughing. For the first time, Celia noticed Alex, really noticed him, and she saw something that made her heart tighten. He was different around Elena, softer, warmer. And Celia didn't understand why it bothered her. She didn't care about Alex. He was just a servant. But something about seeing him happy, seeing him care about someone else, made an ugly feeling twist inside her. And she hated it. So she did what she always did. She destroyed what she couldn't control. The next morning, without warning, Celia called for Elena. The servants whispered anxiously as Elena was led to Celia's study. Alex felt unease creep up his spine. Moments later, a loud crash sounded from the room. Then Celia's sharp voice cut through the halls. "I want her gone." The door burst open and Elena stumbled out, her face pale. Two guards grabbed her by the arms. Alex rushed forward. "What are you doing?" Celia smirked from the doorway, arms crossed. "She stole from me," she said lazily. "I don't keep thieves in my house." Alex's blood ran cold. "Elena would never steal," he said, voice dangerously low. Celia's smirk widened. "Oh, are you defending her? How adorable." She tilted her head. "If you care so much, you can leave with her." Alex clenched his fists. He wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to watch the shock and horror flood her face when she realized who he really was. But not yet. Not yet. So he watched. He watched as Elena was dragged away, her eyes filled with quiet heartbreak. And as Celia turned with a satisfied smirk, walking back inside her grand mansion, completely unaware that she had just sealed her fate. Celia Hartman believed she had won. Elena was gone. The lingering presence of warmth in the mansion had been erased. And yet, something felt off. She should have been satisfied, but an unsettling restlessness crept into her mind. Something about Alex's reaction to Elena's dismissal lingered. The way his jaw had tensed. The way his dark eyes had burned with something she couldn't quite place. But she pushed the thoughts aside. He was just a servant, a nobody. And if he had any foolish attachment to that pathetic maid, he would learn his place soon enough. But what Celia didn't know was that Alex was not done yet. Elena's unfair dismissal had confirmed what he already suspected. Celia had no heart. Yet, before he ended his deception, there was one last thing he needed to do. He needed to be certain. So, for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Alex subtly shifted his behavior. Instead of simply obeying Celia's commands, he began to linger near her. He held eye contact a little longer than usual. He responded to her orders with a calm, collected presence that she wasn't used to. And then, he began his test. One evening, Celia sat in the lounge, sipping wine, basking in the luxury of her world. Alex approached, carrying a fresh bottle. She barely acknowledged him. But as he poured, he spoke, softly, deliberately. "You're fascinating." Celia blinked, startled by the unexpected words. For the first time, she turned her full attention to him. "Excuse me?" Alex set the bottle down, his dark gaze unwavering. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he said smoothly. "There's a fire in you. A power that no one dares to challenge." A slow smirk curled on Celia's lips. She leaned back, intrigued. "Flattery doesn't suit you, servant," she purred. "If you're trying to get on my good side, you're wasting your time." Alex's expression didn't change. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just find myself drawn to you." Celia scoffed, laughing as if the idea was ridiculous. "Drawn to me?" she repeated. "You're a nobody. You think I'd ever consider someone like you?" Alex didn't react, but inside he had his answer. Celia wasn't just cruel, she was proudly cruel. She believed herself untouchable, superior. He had given her a chance, a final test, and she had failed spectacularly. Celia thought she had ended the conversation. She thought she had humiliated him, but she had no idea that the man she had just turned down, the man she had just called worthless, was about to bring her entire world crashing down. Celia Hartman had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable. She had the wealth, the status, and the sheer power to make or break anyone in her presence. And she had never once considered the possibility that the world she ruled so arrogantly was never really hers to begin with. Not until the day he revealed the truth. Not until the day everything came crashing down. 3 days after Celia had humiliated Alex, her father summoned her to his study. Harold Hartman was a man of discipline, known for his sharp mind and ruthless business acumen. He rarely requested meetings, he demanded them. Celia arrived, her usual air of superiority intact. "Father?" she said, crossing her arms. "You asked for me?" Her father looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "I need you to accompany me somewhere," he said simply. Celia raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "To meet my employer." The words barely registered at first. Celia let out a scoff. Your employer? You own one of the biggest investment firms in the country. Why would you? Her father's eyes darkened. I do not own it, Celia, he said coldly. I run it, and the man who owns it has asked to meet you personally. Something about his tone made Celia pause. Her father had never spoken like this before. Not with hesitation, not with unease. She narrowed her eyes. Who is he? Harold exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. His name is Alexander Kingston. Celia froze. The name sent a strange jolt through her. She had heard of Alexander Kingston before. A reclusive billionaire. A man whose wealth made even the richest elites look insignificant. He was powerful, untouchable, and yet she had never met him. So why would he want to meet her? A flicker of interest sparked in her mind. If Kingston was interested in her, it could be an opportunity, a chance to rise even higher. She straightened her shoulders and smirked. Fine, let's go. The car ride was silent. Celia's father barely spoke, his fingers drumming against his knee. It wasn't long before they arrived at an extravagant estate. The moment Celia stepped out of the car, she was in awe. The mansion before her made her home look modest. But what caught her attention the most was the man standing at the entrance, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. His face familiar. Celia's smirk faltered. Her father walked ahead, giving the man a respectful nod. Sir. The man nodded back, his eyes never leaving Celia. And then he spoke. Hello, Celia. A deep, confident voice. And suddenly, recognition hit her like a brick wall. Her blood ran cold. It was him. Alex. The servant. The nobody. Is he a servant here too? She thought to herself as she took a step back, her heart pounding. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's impossible. But the truth stood before her, undeniable and terrifying. The man she had insulted, humiliated, the man she had called worthless, was the very man who owned everything. Celia turned to her father, her voice frantic. This is some kind of joke, right? He's just a servant. Her father's voice was razor sharp, and it made her flinch. Harold's expression was unreadable, but his disappointment was palpable. You foolish girl, he muttered. Celia stared at him, confusion and panic setting in. You knew? She accused. Her father exhaled, shaking his head. Of course I knew. Mr. Kingston came to me months ago, expressing interest in finding a good woman to share his life with. I told him about you. I told him you had potential. He turned to Alex, his jaw tight. But it seems I was wrong. The weight of his words crushed Celia's chest. This was a nightmare. A twisted, cruel nightmare. She turned to Alex, her eyes filled with desperate disbelief. You set me up. Alex's expression remained unreadable. I tested you, he corrected. I wanted to see who you really were when you had nothing to gain. He let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. And you showed me exactly who you are. Celia felt her stomach twist violently. She had been tested, and she had failed, miserably. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Celia's mind raced. What if she had been kind to him? What if she had treated him like a human being? Would things have been different? Would she be standing here as the future wife of one of the most powerful men in the world? A wave of nausea rolled over her. Alex, she started, her voice weaker now. I didn't know. You didn't care to know, Alex cut in, his voice calm but firm. Celia swallowed hard. This wasn't like before. She couldn't manipulate him. She couldn't win. For the first time in her life, she had lost. And it hurt. She tried one last time. A forced smile, a soft tone. Perhaps we could start over? But Alex only chuckled. A cold, final chuckle. I don't think so, Celia. He turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. And Celia's heart sank as another figure stepped into view. Elena. Standing there, radiant and graceful, her eyes filled with warmth. It was a painful contrast. One woman had everything, but lost it all because of her heartlessness. The other had nothing, but gained everything through her kindness. Celia's throat tightened. She already knew what was coming. Alex took a step toward Elena, offering his hand. And without hesitation, Elena took it. Celia's father sighed heavily beside her. Well, Celia, he said quietly, I hope you've learned something from this. Celia wanted to scream. She wanted to undo it all. But it was too late. Because in this story, the wicked girl never got the prince. Does Alex's decision to stay and watch Celia's unraveling make him more of a sympathetic character? Or does it just further solidify his position as the one who was wronged? If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel, Top African Folk Tales, for more intriguing tales.